In the pale light of a waning winter dawn, James's modest farm emerged through the hazy mist, a place where Diep was in search of a new beginning. After all she had endured, from the agony of being trapped by her abusive in-laws to the moment of liberation at James's hands, her heart slowly began to open. But could love truly blossom between a poor, battered woman and a wealthy, powerful CEO, despite the vast chasms that separated their worlds? Diep stood in the middle of a vast warehouse, where towering sacks of corn reached high, and faint beams of light slipped through gaps in the roof, illuminating her worried face. The scent of dry earth and the subtle aroma of corn evoked memories of days when she trudged dusty roads, clutching meager bundles of vegetables to earn a living. She had just returned from the town market, where James's farm-fresh, sweet grapefruits had sold out in an enthusiastic rush. The lively chatter of the buyers still echoed in her mind, yet a mixed feeling simmered within her. A gratitude intertwined with self-doubt, joy mingled with a vague fear. James, the man who had pulled her from the shadows of her past torment, now stood before her with a warm smile, reminiscent of rare winter sunshine piercing through grey clouds. Today, he had come not only to sign a contract with Bin, a local business partner, but also to see her, the woman for whom he had developed deep affection, even though she had yet to believe it was genuine. James entered his well-tailored suit, a stark contrast against the rugged surroundings of the warehouse. His crisp white shirt and polished leather shoes seemed out of place in the dusty scene, yet he carried himself naturally, as if he belonged there. He greeted Bin, a weathered middle-aged man whose lean, sun-kissed face and calloused hands bore the marks of hard labor. "Good morning, Mr. Bin," he said in a deep, steady voice that couldn't quite hide a sense of urgency, as if he was eager to finish his business and have time for something more important. Bin smiled warmly, the smile of a man intimately tied to the land, and gestured toward the stacks of corn. "Welcome. This is the quantity of corn you ordered. 20 tons have arrived so far." Silently, Diep watched, her hands clenching the canvas bag that held the money she had just earned at the market, crumpled coins imbued with the sweat of her labor that morning. Deep inside, a thought stirred like a cold wind. With him so busy, was she just a burden to him? James, as CEO of C Company, was perpetually occupied with multi-million-dollar deals and frequent trips scouting sprawling fields and modern factories alike, and she, a woman once battered by her ex-husband's cruelty and forced to scrape by selling produce, now only knew how to pick grapefruits and tend a humble garden for survival. This stark disparity made her heart ache, as if an invisible blade was slicing through her fragile self-esteem. Yet deep down she could not deny the warmth that filled her each time he appeared, a gentle light she had never thought herself worthy of receiving. Bin led James to a secluded corner of the warehouse, where neatly arranged sacks of corn revealed plump, dry kernels through their worn burlap. "There's still about 80 tons yet to be delivered," Bin explained proudly, as if each sack testified to the sweat and effort he had poured into his work. "This is just my small farm," James nodded, his eyes scanning the kernels as his hand lightly brushed one sack to test its quality. Then he turned to Bin, his voice assured. "I am very satisfied with this quality. We'll sign the contract today." In that moment his gaze drifted toward Diep, his eyes softening with a tenderness only she could perceive, a silent whisper amid the clamor of the warehouse. Diep lowered her head, attempting to hide a shy smile, while her heart raced as if it might burst from her chest, longing to confess feelings she had kept hidden. Soon the contract was signed. James deposited 250 million VND, a sum Diep had never even dared to imagine, an amount that, in her eyes, one could never earn in a lifetime. As Diep expressed his heartfelt thanks, his voice trembling with emotion and his eyes glistening with the joy of a farmer seeing his hard work honored, Diep quietly observed, he had not only rescued her, but had also helped so many others, she thought, as gratitude and self-doubt warred within her. James rose, giving Bin a firm handshake, then turned to her with a gentle invitation. "Diep, shall we go?" She nodded, following him out with a heavy heart brimming with silent questions. Do I really deserve him? With his tall silhouette ahead, like a beacon guiding her through a stormy sea, she felt both drawn to him and painfully aware of the divide that might forever remain. That afternoon, Diep returned to the farm, where lush vegetable beds awaited her care under the fading winter sunlight. She carried 3 bundles of cabbage seedlings and a small amount of onions bought at the market, determined to expand her little garden, a symbol of hope for a self-reliant future. Hucky, the little dog she had rescued from her ex-husband's home, scampered around her, tail wagging enthusiastically, eyes sparkling with vitality. Smiling, she gently patted him and said, "Hucky, you're already at home here, aren't you?" She then untied his leash, letting him run free on the parched grass. Watching him frolic eased some of the burdens of her past, though the worry over James, the man who had transformed her life, still lingered in her thoughts. Rolling up her sleeves, she plunged into her work, her hands working steadily as she dug, sowed and planted. A determined ritual that symbolized her struggle to rebuild a life of pride, far removed from the victim she once was. Every thrust of the shovel was a testament to her perseverance, a reclamation of her self-worth after the dark days under her ex-husband Pau's abuse and the harsh commands of his family. Each spade of earth bore the memory of her resilience and the promise of a future where she was no longer defined by her past. Lost in her labor, she suddenly heard the familiar sound of footsteps along the garden path. There stood James, still in his elegant suit, though now with muddied shoes, a subtle nod to his willingness to get his hands dirty for her sake. He smiled softly and said, "Diep, what are you up to?" Startled, she quickly wiped the sweat from her brow with her sleeve, replying, "Hi, I just came back from selling grapefruits, and now I'm planting more vegetables." James moved closer, his eyes falling on the scratches that marred her weathered hands, exposed under the weak light. "You work so hard," he observed, though his tone carried a note of concern, as if he didn't want her to overexert herself. "Your hands, they're chapped. How did you get those scratches?" Blushing, Diep lowered her gaze, her cheeks tinged with pink from his caring look. "It's nothing, just a minor injury from working," she murmured softly. James frowned slightly, taking her hand and feeling the cold, cracked skin in a tender attempt to share his warmth. "Your hands are too cold and rough. Are you free this afternoon? Come with me on a little trip." Diep hesitated, her eyes briefly meeting his, reflecting both her uncertainty and a spark of hope. Unable to resist his gentle persuasion, she softly nodded, "Yes, I'm free." They climbed into his sleek car, which James drove toward town along bumpy country roads, the engine's hum soothing in the quiet rural afternoon. Seated beside him, Diep gripped her canvas bag tightly, her mind a tumult of emotions as she wondered if her shabby, worn-out clothes would ever seem right in his world. Sensing her unease, James offered a warm smile and said, "You look beautiful. Don't worry about it." His kind words made her blush and her heart flutter like a small, warming flame. Their first stop was James's timber company, a place filled with the fresh aroma of wood and the rhythmic sounds of machinery. There, Lynn, his new secretary, awaited at the entrance. With her sleek, professional look, long flowing black hair and confident demeanor, Lynn made Diep momentarily feel small in comparison. Lynn greeted James with a respectful, "Good morning, boss," and James introduced her to Diep. "This is Diep, someone very important to me." Lynn smiled warmly, her curious glance passing over Diep with genuine kindness rather than condescension. "Nice to meet you," she said sincerely, leaving Diep momentarily surprised by such friendliness. James then led both of them into his office, where a stack of reports cluttered an old wooden desk, its cracks a testament to the many seasons it had witnessed. Pointing to a pile of freshly delivered timber, he asked, "Lynn, is this today's shipment?" Lynn nodded and explained the details about the supplier and the quantities, speaking with the ease of someone well-versed in the business. Diep listened quietly, finding the figures and jargon foreign and leaving her feeling like an outsider in his complex world. Yet when James turned his warm gaze back to her, as serene as a full moon in a clear sky, she understood that he never intended for her to feel excluded. "Diep, shall we continue?" he said, then addressing Lynn, "Are you free to join us?" Lynn nodded, and the trio left the office, stepping out into the soft glow of an early evening. As they climbed back into the car, Diep offered the front seat to Lynn, preferring to sit in the back so as not to disturb the arrangement. James, however, insisted, "You sit in the front, I want you to be comfortable." Diep shook her head with a small laugh. "I'm fine sitting in the back." Though he didn't push her, his eyes continued to watch her in the rearview mirror with genuine care, silently reaffirming that she always held a special place in his heart. Their next stop was a small town shop, its colorful shelves beckoning with an array of items. James led Diep inside, his hand gently resting on her shoulder as a subtle gesture of reassurance. "We need to pick up some gloves and a scarf for you," he said, his tone determined and leaving no room for refusal. Diep hesitated. "I really don't need them, it costs too much." But James, undeterred, selected a light blue knitted scarf, draping it around her neck with such tenderness as if afraid to startle her. "It looks perfect on you," he smiled, his eyes sparkling with affection. Diep lowered her gaze, the warmth of the scarf filling her with comfort, even as a deep-rooted insecurity whispered that she had nothing to offer in return. While Lynn took the car out for a wash, James and Diep remained inside the store. Once Lynn returned, James invited her to join them at a quaint roadside cafe. The small establishment exuded a cozy charm, with a faux Christmas tree in the corner, lending a gentle winter vibe to the chilly evening. James ordered a black coffee for himself, taro milk tea for Diep, and herbal tea for Lynn. As Diep sipped her drink, its delicate sweetness filled her with a quiet wonder. She had never been in such a lovely place, all thanks to him. While Lynn conversed with James about work, discussing numbers and plans in a fluent business-like manner, Diep sat silently, her fingers playing with the new scarf, her thoughts swirling with quiet introspection. Unexpectedly, Lynn turned to her and asked, "Diep, have you and the boss known each other long?" Diep hesitated and then softly replied, "We are just getting to know one another." With a friendly smile, Lynn added, "I can see how much he cares about you. You're very lucky." Diep bowed her head, at a loss for words, as her heart raced with mixed emotions. Lynn continued, "He doesn't see you as just any ordinary friend. He truly loves you." Those words struck Diep like a sudden beat out of rhythm. She wasn't sure whether to be overjoyed or fearful of the depth of his feelings. On the ride back to the farm, James drove in silence while Diep's thoughts swirled. When they arrived, dusk was settling. Diep stepped out and led James into her modest home. Haki bounded over, tail wagging in joyful greeting. Smiling, she patted him and said, "Haki, you must be thirsty, right?" Standing behind her, James asked gently, "Diep, are you making dinner tonight?" She nodded and pointed toward a simmering pot of stir-fried greens on the stove. "I'm preparing some vegetables. Please, join me." James agreed with a nod, rolling up his sleeves to help her finish tending the garden beds. As he leaned down, Diep noticed that he had carefully removed his expensive glasses and watch, setting them aside on the table. He wasn't above getting his hands dirty to help her, she thought, as a warm feeling welled inside her. Together they prepared a simple yet heartfelt dinner, their quiet home filled only with the soft crackle of burning wood and the playful barks of Haki. The meal, modest but full of warmth, was shared in companionable silence. As James sat across from her, picking up vegetables for her, he remarked, "Your cooking is excellent." Diep lowered her eyes and murmured, "Thank you." But inside, a torrent of emotions surged. She at once believed that he pitied her. Now, looking into his sincere eyes, she found the courage to speak. "I'm sorry. I used to think you only pitied me. But now, I realize, I love you." James paused, then smiled gently. He reached out, holding her hand softly. "From the moment I met you, I was captivated by your kindness and strength. I don't pity you, Diep. I love you." His words pierced through her lingering doubts like an arrow, dissolving the remnants of her insecurity. A tear of happiness rolled down her cheek as she smiled back. Suddenly, James's phone rang. Frowning, he answered, "Now?" "All right, I'll take a look and get back to you." Turning to Diep, his tone softened with regret. "I have a few reports to review tonight. I must leave now." Diep nodded, masking her disappointment. "Please, be careful." Then, almost playfully, he added, "Oh, by the way, may I have another roasted corn? I found it so delicious earlier." Diep laughed and dashed off to fetch a freshly roasted ear. "Be careful, it's still hot. Good night," she called out. Holding the warm ear of corn, James glanced at her one last time before getting into his car. As his figure disappeared, Diep stood on the porch, overwhelmed with emotion. She realized that she had found true love, even as she clutched the scarf he had given her. Beside her, Haki wagged his tail, as if sharing in her joy. Yet as the tender love between James and Diep began to blossom, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. A striking, ambitious secretary had appeared in James's world, bearing secrets and aspirations of her own. Would the wealthy CEO's steadfast heart prove strong enough to bridge the gap between social classes and withstand the barbs of envy? Stay tuned for episode 16, set on a peaceful evening at the farm, where the next chapter in this love story will unfold.
Vùng nông thôn Việt Nam, nơi những cánh rừng xanh thẳm ôm lấy từng mái nhà đơn sơ. Tu Diep bắt đầu ngày mới với những bước chân chậm rãi nhưng đầy kiên định. Cuộc sống cô, một người phụ nữ từng bị gò bó trong đau khổ, giờ đây đã có chút ánh sáng nhờ sự xuất hiện của CEO James, người đàn ông giàu có với trái tim ấm áp. Nhưng khi tình yêu thương đã tưởng chừng đã chạm đến trái tim cô, một bóng đen từ quá khứ lại hiện về, kéo theo những nghi ngờ và nỗi sợ hãi. Liệu trái tim Diep có đủ dũng cảm để đón nhận hạnh phúc, hay cô mãi bị giam cầm trong chính những vết thương lòng không lành? Câu trả lời nằm trong những giờ khắc cảm xúc của tập 13 này. Chúc các bạn nghe truyện vui vẻ. Diệp đứng giữa cánh rừng thưa, nơi những chiếc lá rong xanh mướt rủ xuống như những tấm rèm tự nhiên. Ánh nắng đầu ngày xuyên qua tán cây,